I want to quickly look at some of the options for representing glass within the Maxwell Renderer. Right now I have a sphere sitting on top of a tabletop, and it's under Maxwell Sky Daylight. And let's see, I think maybe I'll duplicate it and make some more spheres. And then what I'm going to do is put a material on those spheres. So on the first sphere, we'll say assign new material. You know what, I'm just going to put the materials on real fast and give them names. So that's a default material. I'm going to call it AGS matte. For this object, assign new material. And I'm going to call it high grade matte. This object, assign new materials, low grade matte. And this final one, assign new material, Maxwell layered material, and I'm going to name it frosted matte. Okay, now let's actually assign those materials. I'm just going to use the wizard. So if I go to the material that's called AGS matte, and I say wizard, and I say I want AGS, and we'll give it a reflectivity of 13. I'll get into what that means later. And for this next one, let's see, this one was high grade, so we'll go with glass. High grade. And this next one, wizard, low grade. And notice that the low grade glass is greener. And wizard, frosted. And I'm kind of wondering why this one up here didn't get its AGS. Let's try that again. Wonder what I did wrong there. There it goes. Okay, so you can see that these are three representations of the way Maxwell handles glass. One is architectural glass solution, AGS. One is high-grade glass. One is low-grade glass, and the other is frosted glass. And I'm using the Fire renderer, which is fast, but slowly the frosted glass is starting to fill in. It'll take a little while for it to really sort of look like frosted glass. But one of the main points I wanted to make was that the only difference between all of these three things is the positions of certain numbers and sliders within the shader. The shader is basically the same for every material in Maxwell. So let's start with high-grade glass. Actually, I'm going to make a shell version of it. So make a copy, pull that out, and face, and right click, extrude face, thickness, seems pretty good. Position this a little bit so that you can see the other ones. So put this one here, put this one here, put this one here, and then let's just close this for a second and open up this hypershade, and we'll say this guy graph it, and then this guy assign material to selection, this guy clear, graph it, this guy assign material to selection, this guy clear this, graph it, this guy assign material to selection. Okay, that should be that. So now if we go back to fire, one of the things you can see is that the look of the glass depends a lot on the shape of the model. These upper ones are solid balls full of glass, and the lower ones are shells that are made of glass so that they're hollow on the inside. You can see with the low-grade glass that it picks up a lot more color in the thick version than in the thin version. There's a particular point that I want to make about the way in which glass models should be modeled as well, and that is that they need to be what people call watertight. And what that means is that when a ray hits the glass, it should be confident that it knows that it's entering if it hits it an odd number of times, and it should be confident to know that it's leaving if it hits an even number of times. So if you hit the shell, first hit you're entering, second hit you're leaving, crosses the interior, first hit, the third hit you're entering, fourth hit you're leaving it again. So if I were to do something like take this object here and, just for the sake of discussion, select a few faces and delete them. Hopefully I only have ones from the outer skin. If I delete them, so you can see in the wireframe, you can see into the inner skin. And if you look at the fire representation, I'm a little surprised. It seems to have confused it to the point where it's gone, which is interesting. What I was expecting to see in the fire was what's going to happen when I render it with the slower renderer, which is that the material gets confused, and it thinks that because the outer skin is missing here, it thinks that it's hitting the inner skin, it thinks it's hitting the outside of a thick ball. And the reason it's dark green here is because, for the same reason that it's dark green over here, it thinks it's going through an entire thickness of glass and then leaving on the outside. So whether you get this effect or whether you get the effect in fire where the entire material seems to disappear, you can see either way that you want to make sure that your models are watertight. Hopefully that'll bring the model back. There it is. Okay. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that glass, especially glass with any color in it, like this low-grade glass, has an attenuation. It as the rays penetrate the glass further and further, they pick up more and more color. So if we look at the attenuation unit, right now it's 20 centimeters. So if we were to make it 2 centimeters, you can see that the ray doesn't get very far at all inside the glass before it starts to die out, really pick up a lot of that color and darkening, and then finally die out. And you can see the effect even on the thick shell. So if I were to go to attenuation distance of 2 millimeters instead of centimeters, you can see that now even the shell of the glass is getting quite dense in color. Maybe I'll put this up to 10. So that even though it's a thin shell of glass, like a wine bottle, you could think of it as, it's picked up a lot of color. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that all of these glass objects, with the exception of the AGS, which I want to talk about separately, are all basically the same thing. So let's look at the high-grade glass. What do we have here? We have glass. It's a single BSDF. It has a reflectance 0 of 0 and a reflectance 90 of 0. So it's reflecting no light from its outer surface, you would think. Except, this is a little bit confusing, but except it has this force Fresnel checkbox on. And the force Fresnel checkbox says, even though these values are 0, do in fact reflect light from the outer surface, and let the reflectivity be controlled by the ND. So if I were to uncheck force Fresnel, you can see that we've lost the outer highlights on the glass. So you can see that it is indeed reflecting from the outer surface. We could mimic it again by putting, you know, some light into the reflectance of the ball, and presumably it would start to pick up reflections again. You can see it's starting to happen on the outer. There it is. So just a quick reminder, reflectance 0 is what happens in the middle of the object, sort of. You can think of it as where the light is hitting directly on the object. And reflectance 90 is what happens when it hits kind of obliquely on the object, grazing angles. So you can see that there's a little bit of color going on that indicates that the grazing angles are green and the central zone here is red. Even with force Fresnel on, you can see that we still retain the color. It doesn't really pay much attention to the values of these things, but it does kind of retain the colors. That may be confusing, but the point is that with this glass, we probably don't want any color there. We probably don't want any color there, and we probably want to let force Fresnel handle all of the reflectivity. So whether we're here, you can see that it's black and black and ND of 1.5, 1, force Fresnel on. With the green glass, you can see that the situation is the same, 1.56, slightly different ND. The transmittance has a greenish tinge to it, which you don't really notice in small distances, but in large distances, you would notice it. We were looking at that earlier when I was playing with the attenuation distance on this green glass. So the only significant difference between this glass and this glass is one is slightly greenish in tinge here, and there's a slightly different ND value difference, but otherwise they're basically the same. So you could turn one into the other easily. The frosted glass, let's look at that. Frosted glass has some outer surface reflectivity, some reflection 90 reflectivity, and it also has force Fresnel on, which means that it's largely ignoring these values and getting mostly the colors, and the colors are white in this case, from these two chips. And the reason why we don't have these sharper, more well-defined highlights is because it has a roughness of 60. If it had a roughness of 30, you would start to see that it would let light through the glass a little bit more, and the highlights would start to become better defined on it. If it had a roughness of 10, now you can start to see there's the reflection of the sun behind us or above us, and you know, it's slightly frosted there. We could turn this down and this down and see what effect that has, because the force Fresnel should really be taking care of that as well. and we can go all the way down to roughness of 0. Now, let's see, we've basically turned the frosted glass into the high-grade glass. High-grade glass also was 1.510. So frosted and high-grade glass are now the same. So again, there really isn't a difference in qualitative difference in what these things are. It's more just that there are slight tweaks in the way in which certain parameters are handled. Now we get to the architectural glass. Architectural glass was created because sometimes you don't really want to go through all of the trouble of having refraction going on and all that stuff because it's expensive to compute, and maybe it doesn't contribute that much to the finished image. It's especially true when you have windows on buildings where you're mainly interested in the reflection of the sky and in the glass, and you're not so interested in seeing any kind of refraction effect through the glass into the interior because that kind of is a negligible thing anyway. So when we look at these, what do we see? It's got a reflectance of nearly white, of 0, a reflectance 90 of white. It has a transmittance of 0. That's interesting because it doesn't look like it's got a transmittance of 0. It looks like it's letting some light through, but it's actually opaque. So how is it that, and let's see what else is going on. It's got a roughness of 0. So that's about it. It doesn't have force Fresnel on. What would happen if we turn force Fresnel on? It gets shinier. It gets more of its reflectivity from the ND value, and it's basically getting using the colors of these, but not so much the values. The values are high anyway. So you can see it picked up some reflectivity. If I turn force Fresnel off, it's losing some intensities in its highlight. So where is it getting this quality of letting light through? Well, it's kind of a weird place. It's getting it from this layer. The opacity of the layer is 13. I don't know if you remember when I made the glass, I chose an unusual number for that reflectivity slider when it asks you what kind of reflectivity you wanted. I said 13. That's where the 13 ended up. So this is the opacity of the layer. And you can make the layer fully opaque, and you'll see that what we really have here are mirror balls. Or you could make the opacity of the layer fully 0, and you can see they go away. So here's a slight hint of the mirror ball. So you can see really what we're doing is a cheat. We're capturing the reflection by using a mirror ball, and we're ghosting it in to give the illusion that glass is present, when in fact it's not. So let's see, what is the ND? ND is 20 here, which is the kind of an ND value you usually have for a reflective object that doesn't have any transmittance at all. In fact, if we let some light through, let's make this, just out of curiosity, let's let it all the way back, and then let's let some transmittance, significant amount of transmittance in. So with an ND of 20, now you're refracting, so now it's getting to be more of a complex calculation. But with an ND of 20, the light is so warped in there that it basically treats it like a solid object. Whereas if you were to drop down to an ND of 2, which is more in the range of things that certain liquids are, let's see what we get. So there's a liquid. Now, why is it so dark? It's dark because for whatever reason, the attenuation distance is minuscule. So if we make that typical for a thing of this scale, like 30 centimeters, you can see that we've basically we've turned architectural glass by putting the ND down to something in the range of, well, we'll go 1.51. That's where some of the other ones were. And we're letting a lot of light through. In fact, we don't need to let any light through. I mean, bounce any light off, because we can bounce the light off using force Fresnel. And now we have an attenuation distance of 30 centimeters. So now we've turned AGS, architectural glass solution, into one of the other glasses. Now if we, put a little green tint into this, we've basically mimicked the low-grade glass. And I cranked the green a little bit further than it really probably was in the other one. It's more like there, but you see that you get the idea. So, so there are a number of different ways in which glass can be handled in Maxwell, apparently, but you don't really need to hunt for one material or another material and use one and one way. And you can take any material and make it another material, and you should feel comfortable playing with these things and turning one version of the glass into another version, or one version of any material into another version for that matter.